Welcome back to Financial Fortitude, the podcast where we mix practical money tips with a little tough love and a whole lot of heart to help you live your best life today and plan for an incredible tomorrow. We're your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly.
And today we're diving into a topic that might just save your financial future, or at least keep your loved ones from relying on GoFundMe during the toughest time of their lives.
Let's be real. Term life insurance often gets a bad rap among young, healthy professionals. It's expensive, they say, or I'll deal with it later, they promise. But here's the truth. This affordable safety net can do more than just cover funeral costs. It's a strategic tool that delivers tax-free death benefit, giving your spouse or family the financial stability to stay on track toward the retirement goals that you share together today, even in the face of an untimely loss.
So stick around. We're breaking down why term life insurance isn't the burden you might think it is, and how it's actually one of the smartest moves you can make for yourself and your loved ones. So grab your coffee, your notepad, and let's get started. This is Financial Fortitude, and today's conversation could change your perspective and potentially your legacy. Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in.
Brady, I'm excited to talk about today's conversation, which is really an interaction that we come across often in our client engagements. And this one is specific to young professionals who are healthy and living a great life and doing great work, but may or may not need life insurance, right? On the surface level, it might seem like, well, they're young, they're invincible. Death is far off into the future. Why waste money on paying for term life insurance?
Yeah, I think this is a topic that we run into all of the time, especially knowing that the first argument or combative language that we hear is, well, why don't I just invest the difference, right? I'm as healthy as can be. I'm making great money. Hey, I'm doing a pretty good job saving at this point. Isn't it just in my best interest to shove all of this extra money I would otherwise be using for insurance into my 401k, into my Roth IRA, maybe even into a brokerage account? I'm likely not going to be the one that passes away untimely or early.
And to take it even further, when we as consumers, and I've experienced this myself, when we go out into the ether and start Google searching things, we're going to get polarizing responses and opinions. We see this day in and day out from one extreme of, hey, everyone needs to have maximum amounts of life insurance. Doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're married, single, have dependents, whatever. You need maximum amounts of coverage. And then you have on the other side the complete opposite. Hey, you don't really need life insurance. You can self-insure, especially if the stock market continues to crush it like it has been, posting double-digit returns more often than not. And we've recognized through our client engagements and continuing to expand our knowledge base as financial advisors that this needs to be humanized. Let's remove some of the stigmas. Let's remove some of the polarizing opinions, and let's really delve into, one, what's the client's overall risk appetite? How much are they willing to self-insure if plausible, versus does it make sense for them to transfer that risk to somebody else?
So let's break down this scenario almost in role play fashion, right? Let's treat it like, hey, I'm the client. I'm the one with the questions. I'm the one who's done all the reading. And you are the advisor, not taking one of those hyper polarizing opinions and saying, hey, let's address this in moderation and address it really understanding what's at stake. So tell me about who I am, what my world looks like client-wise.
Yep. So you're a young medical professional, age 35, planning on working to at least age, let's call it 65, right? For us, that's a little bit earlier than full retirement age. Saving at an amazing clip. You're married to an amazing individual. They're also in the medical field, and you both make the same amount of income. Let's call it $100,000 each.
Okay.
So they're saving at extraordinary wealth building rate of 20% of annual gross income. So if you make $200,000 a year, you're putting $40,000 back on your balance sheet, which is awesome stuff, because you're going to allow compounding interest and time value money to work in your favor if we can continue to sustain that, which I think you will be based on your personality. And we were doing a pulse check, reviewing your financial immune system just to see how things were going, and haven't had children yet, so no dependents. You own a home, so there's a mortgage on the books. There are some federal student loan debts on the books, and you're young, you're healthy, but you want to have children in the future. You've expressed that in our conversations as we've gotten to know one another and build a rapport. So the conversation of term life insurance obviously came up because once you get married, there's more at risk, there's more at stake. You add dependence to the situation, there's even more responsibility that needs to be thought of depending on the makeup of your household and whether you're a single income household or dual income. So for you specifically, dual income household, no dependents, both medical professionals, some debts on the book, making strong income.
So I'll pause you there for a second. I think one thing that is notable that I'm pulling out of the conversation thus far is if you are a young professional and there are things at stake, right? I've got a family, I've got a mortgage, I've got aspirations. Your financial professional should be having the conversation with you. Hey, what does your immune system look like? It may go in any particular direction depending on who that person is and what you've shared with them. But it's important to have these conversations, which I'm sure you'll explain here in a moment, even if it's just education first.
And the question you posed was, well, should I be paying X amount towards term insurance for, let's say, the next 20 years, assuming they get a 20-year term policy? Or do I just save the money that I would have otherwise dedicated towards life insurance premiums and invest it with the rest of my money and just self-insure? And I thought this was an excellent question and exercise to walk through because it's something that I would imagine most of us have thought about in some form or fashion along the way as we continue to wade through what's known as adulting 101.
Now, let's break down that stigma. I think me as a young professional who's got health on his side, whose spouse likely has health on their side, the first thing that I hear when I hear insurance is extra cost each month and a waste of money, and a waste really being driven by the fact that I'm not really thinking I'm the one that's going to need the insurance or ever collect the benefit.
Correct, because their story's not our story's not your story.
Yes.
That could never happen to me. And that's fine if you have that mentality, right? I'm not here to change your mindset. We're here having this conversation to empower and provide knowledge and alternatives and considerations as we humanize this financial conversation. So in simple mathematics, it's a question of, okay, well, over 20 years, one, what is the cost that I would be dedicating towards term life insurance? Well, in going and doing a little bit of research, looking at a bunch of different carriers, the average cost of a superb, elite, healthy young professional is about $500 a year for we'll call it a 20-year term with a death benefit of $1 million.
Okay. So talk to me about that just briefly. Elite health rating. Do I have a six-pack and I'm running marathons, or what does that look like for the average person?
Well, I don't have a six-pack and I like to run half marathons. Maybe that's why I only do half is because I don't have a six-pack. No, this individual, to receive a top-tier health rating, it's going to be different with every carrier, but in general, it's an individual that doesn't have extensive medical background, doesn't have crazy family medical history, isn't on medications or anything like that, right? So clean bill of health is what we're thinking here.
Yeah, and maybe not the six-pack, but someone who hasn't yet outgrown their height width-wise.
Yeah, or maybe outgrown their lungs, right?
Okay. Yep.
And so in this scenario, the question is like, okay, well, if I live the full 20 years and I don't pass away within that period of time, because again, contractually, the insurance carrier will pay you if you meet the terms of the contract and you pass away within year 1 and year 20. So the question then becomes, okay, well, over 20 years, how much would I have dedicated? Well, it's simple math. $500 a year times 20 is what?
$10,000.
Right. So the opportunity cost there is, okay, well, how much would my $10,000 have grown over the course of a 20-year period?
Yep.
And would it be more or less or even close to what I would have received in the event that I passed away somewhere between year 1 and 20?
So I guess my first question is, where do we get started, or how do you really quantify the value of that $500? What am I paying for if I'm not really expecting that I'm going to die? That doesn't happen to me.
Or my favorite one is, well, if I die, my wife will just get remarried, right? Like that is a great response with humor. And oftentimes the wife or the spouse or the significant other will lean over in their chair and look at them with these eyes of like disgust. Like, did you really just say that? Like, you don't think I'm going to grieve you, or you think I'm just going to go right back to the playing field? But no, in all seriousness, what you're getting in exchange is what I would coin as peace of mind, but also financial flexibility. not having to rely on others to help keep you afloat financially through the form of something like a GoFundMe or a fundraiser, because we did not deem that it was prudent enough to, again, spend $500 in exchange for a tax-free death benefit of $1 million.
Okay.
Right?
So I'm interested, right? Hey, it makes sense. I'm not the individual who is willing to put their future or their stake in a GoFundMe or the friends and family that I have around me. It makes sense having some protection in place, but how does the math actually work, or what can you show me that's going to make sense? It's worth spending the 500 instead of investing the 500.
Yeah, of course. So the first thing that I will say is let's look at a time horizon of 30 years. Again, age 35, planning on exiting the workforce at age 65, so 30 years worth of work. Again, we both earn $100,000 a year, okay? And let's say that our lifestyle, like total outflows, is going to be 160,000, growing at 3% annually, and we're also getting a 3% raise annually as well.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the reason why we're using this simple math is because, like I mentioned, these individuals are saving at an extraordinary wealth building rate, EWB status, 20% of their annual gross income. So 200,000 minus 20% is an outflow of 160. They're saving $40,000 a year back on their balance sheet in some form or fashion. So if we do the math, and I'm sharing my screen for anyone who's just listening and didn't tune in on YouTube, if we look at this illustration, we can see that over the course of a 30-year time horizon, there's the opportunity to accumulate about $4.68 million, right? We refer to this often as our wealth building potential. So this is what's at stake. This is what's at risk.
And that is essentially the portfolio that me and my wife would be stepping into retirement with, right? That's going to help preserve and essentially build out the lifestyle that we'll live after we stop working.
Correct. And so two sides of the story. Right now, we're on the accumulation phase. What you're referring to is when our clients experience the deaccumulation phase, right? Taking everything that we've built up and now starting to spend it down. Another way of saying that is going up the mountain and then working with a Sherpa to come back down the mountain safely, right? So you actually make it back down to the bottom of the mountain.
Okay.
So again, $4.68 million is what's at stake. Let's now look at an individual who says, okay, well, I don't want term life insurance because I'm young and I'm healthy, right? I'm just going to continue to invest. I'm not going to worry about putting the $500 annual premium towards some sort of temporary thing that's not going to happen to me because that's not my story. Well, let's say that this individual, one of the spouses, passes away in year 5, okay? By that point in time, that $100,000 that they were earning in year 1 is now valued at about $112,000.
Yep, it's that cost of living raise that I've been getting each year.
Correct. And so what we're going to see is something in my mind that's somewhat eye-opening. This blue line represents our potential long-term, that $4.68 million in wealth that we could have otherwise realized or generated had we lived all 30 years and continued to just grow.
Yep.
Well, when we look at this life event occurring, the first thing that flashes across the screen is a bunch of red, right?
So explain that, because I spent 5 years working, earning, saving, and investing, and then it all very quickly, within 3 or 4 years thereafter, is now zero and then red. Well, why is that the case?
Well, this is the case because we're assuming the lifestyle remains the same for the surviving spouse.
Okay.
And the immediate objection that you likely had in this conversation is, well, yeah, my costs just go down from being, 2 times to 1 times because there's only one of us living. We're not buying nearly as many groceries. Well, I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed or when I'm grieving, I overeat. That's one of my coping mechanisms. So your grocery bill might double, right? A little humor for the conversation because this isn't an exciting conversation. But what's happening here is we're saying, hey, our goal isn't for our lifestyle to be cut in half or even be squished after one of us passes away. And it's definitely not while we're living. So why would we want that just because we're no longer here? We still want some sort of financial stability and success for our surviving spouse. Now, what's unique about this situation is that they're married, no dependents. Now, we know they want to have kids. So who's to say that over the course of these first 5 years, they haven't added children to the mix?
Yeah, at this stage, I've still got the same mortgage. At this stage, I may have 1, if not 2 little kids who are still eating groceries. And I have expenses, most likely, that my spouse or the loss of income otherwise is going to hurt. And at this stage, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I may not be able to work as much because I have to now be part-time worker, part-time dad.
Correct. And what we don't want for our clients is for them turning into a part-time parent during a time of grieving because the finances are just so tight because we did not proactively prepare, or maybe we didn't have as many friends as we thought when it comes to contributing to a GoFundMe for ourselves. And so what this illustrates is that by year 5, there's about $253,000 that was accumulated, but because we lost 50% of the household income, we're now overspending each year. And so the blue on our chart starts to turn into red really quickly, which just means all of our assets are depleted.
Yep.
And so what we end up missing out on is this section here that I've colored in red from a wealth building perspective. So the question then becomes, well, what could we have done differently? And if you were the client in this scenario and I asked you that, what do you think we could have done differently? What do you think your response would have been?
It would have been to buy term insurance after
Right.
I knew that I needed it.
Yeah, in some capacity. And when's the best time to look at getting term life insurance?
Generally, it's going to be when you're at your youngest and your healthiest, knowing that you can lock in rates. When do most people want the most insurance? When something bad happens. Right? When do I want the best auto policy? When I crash my car.
Right, exactly, right. Or when do I want the best health insurance? When I have to go get a medical procedure done or go visit a specialist, right?
Yep.
It's always after the fact because we do not perceive the value of what's being offered in exchange for our cash flow, right? So what if this individual, still using the same scenario, said, okay, well, I'm going to buy the term life insurance, and let's say it's $1 million and $500 a year, and so I'm going to incorporate that cost of the insurance as well. Now, when I go back to that same chart, it looks significantly different. Now, it's not perfect, but it looks much better.
And for those who are just listening, essentially what we see in year 5, instead of our assets starting to trickle out of our portfolio, that term life insurance tax-free benefit steps in, an extra $1 million comes into my world. And now, much more slowly over time, the portfolio starts to essentially decrease, or money starts coming out, knowing that, hey, I've still got expenses, or my spouse still has expenses that need to be paid when I'm not here anymore.
Correct. And what we're assuming in all of these scenarios is that the assets that we're accumulating or the death benefit that we're receiving is growing and compounding at a net return of 6%. Okay. And so what this chart is showing is that, hey, in year 5, when I pass away, tax-free death benefit of $1 million hits the household. Well, it's growing at 5%, but we're probably spending more than the 5% growth that we're experiencing. So it's going to gradually decrease and go down over time as far as the assets. But on paper, I don't run out of assets until year 29. I still have my income that I've been accumulating. I just haven't been able to grow my assets. So it's still not a success because what you see here is this gap in red that I've colored that just shows, hey, we're still missing out on potential wealth that we could have otherwise realized had neither one of us passed away. And there's only 3 things in life guaranteed: taxes, changes to tax laws, and death.
Yeah, so here, if nothing does happen to me and I pay the insurance premium the whole time, what does my world look like otherwise? Because I still know that this is probably not my story.
That's a very simple fix. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, you lived the full 30 years, so there is no death benefit that's going to come in year 5. And because there's no death in year 5, there's no loss of income. But we're paying for this term insurance policy through year 1 through 20. And again, it's $500 per year.
Okay.
So when we go look at the chart, what we see from a flow perspective is that I'm really no worse off. My potential wealth over that period of time was $4.68 million. What I actually accumulated, $4.63 million. Right?
So almost nothing bigger picture over that time, at least for those who are, again, just listening. The original chart versus the chart plus insurance costs is neck and neck. There's almost no discernible difference.
Right. It's very, very much a moot point for the potential of having flexibility financially and peace of mind. It's the potential for it. Now, one scenario that often comes up is, well, why would I do a 20-year term and not a 30-year if I'm planning on working another 30 years? And my rationale there is that, hey, over time, our overall risk begins to diminish as we get closer to realizing all of our potential wealth, meaning as we get closer to retirement and exiting the workforce, our risk starts to diminish and decrease because we're so much closer, and hopefully we've been prudent at saving at an EWB rate and putting money back on our balance sheet during those years of life.
So explain that. What do you mean by risk is diminishing?
Yeah, so the analogy I like to use or refer to is think of a target date fund in your 401k. If you've recently enrolled in your 401k, you know that you had options from a target date perspective that said 2050, 2055, 2030, 2035, 2060. What those dates are referring to are the dates at which you think you are going to retire or exit the workforce or stop working. The further away that date, 2060 as an example, the more growth oriented you will be. Your portfolio should be tilted more towards stocks for growth potential. The inverse of that is if the target date's 2035, you're closer to retirement, so there's going to be less stock and equity in the portfolio and more fixed income or bonds for predictability, right?
Okay.
More sense of security because you're about to enter retirement, exit the workforce. Now, from an analogy perspective, it's, hey, when I'm flying, the further away I am from my destination, the higher altitude I'm typically going to be. I'm flying high, if you will.
Yep.
The closer I get to my destination, the lower I am from an altitude perspective, so much so to when I reach my destination, the wheels touch the ground. Now, I'm not a pilot and I'm not the smartest man in the room, but are you at greater risk when you're at your highest altitude or when your wheels are on the ground?
It's typically highest altitude, right? Along the journey.
Right. So when I look at this, it's okay, well, if my potential wealth building is about 4.8 million over the course of 30 years, the risk is me passing away before I reach that point. Now, with that being said, I'm drawing on my screen basically the inverse of this chart. On the right side of this chart, I've realized all my potential wealth of 4.68 million. On the left side of my chart, which is year 1 versus year 30, that's where I should have the highest amounts of death benefit for myself. And over the course of a 20-year period, if this death benefit falls off the books, well, it will look different if I pass away in, say, year 21 with no death benefit, but I will have at least had 20 years of growing and accumulating assets.
I've
right?
got money at this point. In year 1 or year 5, in our example, if something happens, the real challenge is I just don't have any money yet. I have a great start, but not nearly enough to retire and protect my family. By year 20 or 25 or at any point much later in our scenario, I've got a great nest egg already built. So there's just less of a need for insurance is what it looks like.
And then you're also reviewing, or you should be reviewing with your insurance agent or financial representative, as your life changes or as you get close to having that life insurance policy expire or quote unquote mature because you've outlived the terms of the contract, potentially looking at, do I need another policy? Maybe it's a 10-year term at that point versus a 15 versus a 20 versus a 30.
Yep.
And again, when it comes to the overall annual premium of the policies, there's variables that go into it, being age, amount of death benefit, term of coverage, again, 10 years up to 30 years, and then of course, types of coverage. But today we're just focusing on term. So we like to stagger coverage because we recognize that risk decreases over time, assuming you're going to live a long and healthy life, and we realize your wealth building potential along the way. We also recognize that as you grow your family, that there may be a need to increase your coverage in some form or capacity, at least until your youngest child is either out of high school or about to get out of college, which again is going to be about 20 years.
Yep.
So it's not something that's set in stone and that should be static. And one thing that we can look at is, okay, well, in this scenario, using this couple, using this example, what happens if the individual passes away in year, let's call it 15? So cost of insurance for those 15 years is $500 a year. The death benefit is $1 million tax-free, okay? And death is going to occur in year 15 when that $100,000 that I was earning from the onset is now estimated to be around $151,000 a year because of the cost of living adjustments of 3%.
And at this stage, I'm 50, so I may or may not feel as invincible as I do right now at 35.
You might be crushing it on the pickleball court, but that's a whole different story. So when we go look at the chart in this scenario, again, just to recap, I lived for 15 years. I was paying a $500 annual premium for 15 years. I passed away untimely at age 50. My income stops, which again, at that point is valued around $151,000, $152,000 a year. And I got a tax-free death benefit of $1 million coming into my household for my surviving spouse. Okay. The first thing that we recognize is that, hey, there's no red on this screen, meaning that we did not run out of assets.
No, none at all. What actually we're seeing here is when the tax-free death benefit comes in, that my portfolio is essentially level from when it starts all the way until retirement, the next 15 years.
And by year 15, your current view from a wealth building potential, had you lived a healthy life to year 15, and we measured what your asset value was at that point. Again, assets growing at a net return of 6%. We're saving $40,000 a year, which is 20% of our annual gross income. And what we're saving is growing at 3% because, again, cost of living adjustments. So we want our savings rate to be percentage based so that our cost of living goes up, and we put a stiff arm on the lifestyle creep, Derrick Henry style. And so our asset value is pinned in year 15, if we live a healthy life, at $1.18 million. But because I pass away at that point in time, the asset value for my surviving spouse is almost $2.1 million because it's the assets that I have plus a death benefit that came in. And to your point, what you were explaining is that from that point forward, my asset value actually does not go down, but at least for the next 10 years to year 25, the asset value creeps up gradually because the cost of living starts to outpace the growth in my assets at that point, because we're just assuming for the full 30 years, cost of living remains the same as far as what you were spending prior to your spouse's death, but is still going up at 3% year over year.
And at this stage, my spouse, who fast forward the next 15 years, approaches retirement, still being able to be a full-time parent for the most part, still being able to maintain work and have the financial freedom, flexibility to retire at that stage. It may not look the exact same as if I was still there with her, but big picture, there's a nest egg that's sitting there and still waiting.
And what we see that I'm drawing out now is the gap between what your wealth building potential would have been and what your assets actually ended up being. And so we're looking at year 30, surviving spouse exiting the workforce with about 2.2 million, just under 2.2 million, versus, had both spouses lived a long and healthy life, having about 4.68 million. So about almost 50%, we'll call it. But that's still better versus some of the other scenarios had I passed away with no assets, or had I passed away with no term life insurance.
Based on what we had talked about before, cost-wise, it really doesn't impact me if nothing does happen. My overall portfolio and wealth looks very similar come year 30 if life works out perfectly. But if life doesn't work out perfectly, hey, I have this big parachute or buffer that's there for the family.
And going back to the original question of, well, should I just self-insure by saving the $500 a year and having that invested, knowing that I'm probably not going to die within the next 20 years? Well, we could look at the efficiency of what would need to be required in order to say, okay, well, in year 15, if I saved $500 a year and it grew at 6, 8, 10, 12%, what do I need to either generate return-wise, or how much would I need to be saving annually on my balance sheet to have $1 million available at that point in time?
I've got a feeling that might be a big bill.
And it might be a bill that you don't want. So I have two calculators side by side on the screen for anyone who's tuning in on YouTube versus just listening on Spotify or Apple. And what I have here is, again, an efficiency calculator, starting with a present value of $500, paying that for either 5 or 15 years, because those were the examples of when death arose untimely, and wanting $1 million coming back in or being available from a future value perspective, and me only adding or paying $500 a year for that period of time. Well, if death occurs in 5 years, I would need to be generating a growth rate of 285%.
It's pretty unreasonable from the looks of it.
If death knocks on my door in year 15, I need to be generating on average a return of about 51.5%.
Okay.
Still not realistic, but not 285% in 5 years on average.
I think this really tracks back towards, and now I'm almost stepping out of my client shoes back into my financial professional shoes. And what it steps back to is that In a perfect world, yes, you will spend money on insurance, and in an ideal world, you don't die early. You don't use it. But oftentimes the pros of which we're showing the function of term life insurance, it's just simply a tool used to protect your family and continue to grow your portfolio if in the event that anything untimely or unexpected does happen. Right? And we can use that tool as leverage over time as an example to take greater investment risk. Right? If something happens to me untimely, I'm able to keep invested or stay invested in my portfolio, knowing that my spouse is going to get a large sum of money if something happens.
Correct. And everyone's situation is different, which is why the conversation needs to be humanized. And there's a ton of behavior that goes into a lot of this. It's different for everybody because of their circumstances. We've talked about you and I in our different seasons of life that we're in on multiple episodes. I'm married. I just had my 4th child last October. Every time we add another child to our household, I'm constantly looking at how much term life insurance do I have on my life as the sole breadwinner in the event death comes knocking on my door. Oftentimes, it's another 15-year term policy, another 10-year term policy, potentially even a 20-year term policy. It's just being prudent and thinking about adulting 101. This is something that has to be thought about and done as a parent, as a spouse. If you're single, it's a completely different conversation. The higher priority for you in that scenario, in my opinion, is making sure that your ability to earn income is protected at the utmost potential, right? Personal long-term disability with true own occupation contract language. Like that's what you should be investing in. But once you get married, there's a completely different game that you're playing, which is where life insurance comes into play along with other considerations within your financial immune system domain that we often reference.
I'd say big call outs for this episode, at least from what I'm gathering, and feel free to chime in, is first and foremost, if you're working with a financial professional or not, this is a conversation you should be having with that person or with yourself. How much life insurance do I have? Do I need to consider more in some form or fashion? What does my world look like? How can I use this coverage as a tool? The other big call out that I'm seeing is for younger, healthier individuals, the cost of insurance does not look as much like a waste of money over a longer term time horizon. It might feel like that each time you pay the premium once a year, but it doesn't look like it as your world continues to expand time-wise. And the utility or the tool of a death benefit tax-free stepping into your world can make an extreme impact on anyone that's left behind if in the event that you are the one person that experiences an untimely death in your world.
Yep, no, I agree with that. And I would even add, personally, I have some pretty great friends. I have great family, but I do not want to have my wife feel as though she has to rely on their generosity that may or may not show up if I don't come home one day, especially before we get closer to exiting the workforce and riding off into the sunset, into our golden years and everything else. Because just like all of you, we have, aspirations and goals from a retirement standpoint as well as we continue to master our accumulation years and work towards maintaining extraordinary wealth building rates of saving and everything else. What I will add to this is that if you're considering applying for life insurance or needing to up your insurance or even looking for a complimentary consultation just to review the types of coverage that you have and the amount of coverage that you have, we're more than happy to have a conversation with you. And understand that there are tons of different carriers out there. Their underwriting requirements are going to differ as far as which carriers are more stringent than others from reviewing an application and medical history. So if you've ever received a not so stellar health rating when you've applied, that's okay. We can go back to the drawing board. We can try to help you to get in front of a carrier that might be a little bit more lenient or more favorable for you by doing a little bit of field underwriting. So this conversation is really about, one, is your financial immune system working for you or against you? Are you thinking about what it means to be adulting and making sure that you're prepared for the unexpected regardless of what life throws at you? And is the financial representative that you have in your corner humanizing the conversation for you and not forcing you into a box?
I guess the next big piece of this whole conversation, which we'll certainly have another episode shortly to follow, is then how much is the right amount? How should I be structuring that amount? And what types of insurance should I be considering? all things that are going to just as much complement the discussion that we had today. But first and foremost, it's always, hey, is this important? Is it something I need to review? Answer many times is yes.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to those conversations because I think those are probably going to be 1 or 2 additional episodes coming in the future. So definitely stay plugged in, stay tuned, subscribe, and everything else just so that you don't miss out on those future episodes.
Thanks for tuning in to Financial Fortitude, where we blend the art of living your best life today with the science of planning for tomorrow. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone else who could use a little financial fortitude.
Got questions or topics you'd like us to tackle? Shoot us a message by visiting us at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/AMA. We're here to help. And don't miss out on exclusive tips and insights by following us on LinkedIn and your favorite podcast platforms.
Until next time, keep your goals in sight, your strategy tight, and your mindset bright. Here's to building a future that's as fulfilling as your present. See you next time on Financial Fortitude. Thank you for joining us this week on the Financial Fortitude podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and learned something along the way.
If you're looking for financial guidance that is personalized to your specific needs, we're here to help. Visit us at www.genesiswealthplanning.com to book a complimentary consultation.
That's it for today. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And as always, please share with others you feel could benefit from the show. See you next time.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady Hammerly are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hammerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077. 7237198.3, expiration 227.